Stop. I can't let this continue. A dramatic voice rang out, interrupting the sacred moment as Garrett and I were about to exchange our vows. All eyes turned to the person who had just spoken. Bianca stood there, her face pale but her eyes shining with fake determination. I'm pregnant with Garrett's child. The room seemed to freeze. An eerie silence fell, before the whispers began to spread like a tidal wave, washing away everything that remained of the ceremony. My name is Lillian, I am 30 years old and I am about to enter one of the most important milestones of my life, my wedding to Garrett, the man I have loved and been with for the past 4 years. I never thought I would have such a beautiful love, a solid relationship with trust and companionship from both of us. Garrett is a good man, responsible, thoughtful, and always makes me feel safe. He has a stable career, a calm personality, and especially knows how to make me feel loved. We have overcome many difficulties together, from work pressure to small disagreements in life, and each time, our love becomes deeper. For someone like me, who grew up independent and didn't often receive favor from my family, finding a man like Garrett was like a gift from fate. I didn't have a very special family, but it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that I felt out of place in my own home. I had an older sister, Bianca, 4 years older than me, who was always the center of attention in the family. Since she was little, her parents had always been so overprotective that it seemed like her mistakes and shortcomings were overlooked, while I was the one who had to deal with everything on my own. I was never allowed to make mistakes because if I failed at anything, people would simply say I wasn't good enough instead of trying to help me. Bianca wasn't very talented, but she had one habit that always annoyed me: she loved attention. Whether it was family meals, gatherings, or just casual conversations, she always tried to make herself the center of attention. She never liked to be overshadowed, and I was so used to having to step aside so she could shine. As a kid, I thought it was just a personality difference, but as I got older, I realized that Bianca wasn't just interested in attention, she wanted to take everything that other people had, even things that weren't hers. I first realized this when I introduced Garrett to my family. We'd been dating for 3 years when I introduced him to my parents. It was a big deal because I knew that if things went well, we'd consider getting married. At first, things went well. My parents seemed pleased with Garrett. He was polite, had a steady job, and knew how to behave. I thought I'd finally be able to enjoy a family gathering without feeling compared or left out. But I was wrong. From the moment Bianca walked into the room, I sensed something was different. She stared at Garrett, longer than necessary, then quickly turned into a gentle smile I'd never seen before. I'm not a jealous person, and at first I thought she was just being friendly. But then I noticed the way she touched his arm when she spoke, the way she leaned toward him when she laughed, and especially the way her eyes never left him for too long. Garrett, ever the gentleman, just smiled and chatted, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. After that meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I told myself I was overthinking things, that my sister would never do anything so outrageous. But a week later, Garrett told me that Bianca had tried to contact him. She'd taken the liberty of getting his number from my mother and texting me just to get to know each other. I remember how I felt a mixture of surprise, anger, and disappointment that I'd known since I was a kid. I didn't want to confront her, because I knew that if I did, I'd only make myself look bad in my parents' eyes. Instead, I told Garrett that if she continued like this, he didn't have to respond. He nodded, said he understood, and I was sure it would all be over soon. But I'd underestimated Bianca's tenacity. After that, every time my family got together, she always tried to stand close to Garrett, held his hand longer than usual when greeting him, and even once accidentally fell into him, making me suspect that it was a staged act. She said things like, "Are you sure Garrett is the one for you? I'm just worried about you," or "I just feel like he's more mature," but I knew that wasn't genuine concern. It was a hint that Garrett deserved someone else, and that someone was her. My parents, as usual, said nothing. They never really interfered with what Bianca did. because they always thought she needed protecting, that she was more sensitive than me and couldn't handle disapproval. But I couldn't keep pretending like nothing was happening. I knew that if I kept putting up with it like I had been, she wouldn't stop. She would keep pushing the boundaries, testing Garrett and my patience over and over again, and if I didn't do something, she wouldn't stop. I decided that I wasn't going to let her take what was most important to me. It took me so long to accept that I didn't have to live in her shadow anymore. And this time I wasn't going to stand by and watch her come into my life again. Garrett and I had a plan for the future, and I would do anything to protect it. But what I didn't expect was that Bianca had her own plan, a plan I'd never imagined. And it would explode on my wedding day. I'd thought that Bianca's actions were just a whim, a momentary jealousy that would pass. But I was wrong. When I realized that Garrett wasn't paying attention to me, that no matter how she tried to get close, his eyes were always on me, Bianca changed. Instead of fake intimacy or meaningless innuendos, she became sharper, more vicious, and more dangerous. If she couldn't turn Garrett away from me, she would make this wedding impossible. Bianca began to spread poisonous words into the ears of my parents, who had always been on her side since childhood. I didn't need to be there to know what they were saying behind my back. I could imagine her sitting in front of my parents, her eyes glistening with hurt, complaining that I was too hasty, that I was selfish for marrying before her, that I didn't care about her feelings. She must have told them that an older sister couldn't stand seeing her younger sister marry first, that I should have waited for her, that I shouldn't have been so hasty. My parents, as always, didn't need any proof or reasoning. They were used to assuming that Bianca was pathetic, that anything that didn't go her way was unfair. They didn't think about how long I'd been with Garrett, that this was true love, that I'd waited for this day. No, all they saw was that I surpassed my sister, and that was unacceptable. They started telling me things I never wanted to hear. They told me to think again. They asked me if I was sure I was ready, that marriage could wait, but family couldn't. They said I was selfish. They never blamed Bianca for being jealous, but they blamed me for daring to be happy. I knew it wasn't the first time they'd chosen her over me. But this time, I couldn't take it. I was used to being the one who had to give in, but this was my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone else decide for me. I'd been through so much to get here, and I knew that Garrett was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. So I didn't back down. I told my parents that I was going to go through with the wedding, whether they agreed or not. I didn't say it with defiance or anger, but with the certainty of a grown woman who was no longer the child who had to live in her sister's shadow. Bianca couldn't take it. She realized that her sweet words, fake tears, and emotional manipulation weren't enough to make me give up. She needed something stronger, something that could completely destroy this wedding. She started spreading rumors. I don't know exactly what she said to her relatives, but I started getting strange messages from some of them, suggesting that I was doing something wrong. I knew this was Bianca's trick, another attempt to get me to back down. But that wasn't enough to worry me. I was used to her tricks, so she switched to another method directly attacking Garrett. She tried to sow doubt, to sow seeds of insecurity, not in me, but in the man I loved. She told him that I wasn't right for him, that I was rushing into the marriage for status, that I didn't really love him like he thought. She even said that my parents didn't approve of the marriage, as if that were a sign that something was wrong, that he should reconsider. But what scared me more than anything was how she talked about herself. Not only did she try to destroy my love, she also wanted to replace me. She told Garrett that she was the one for him, that she was more mature, more sensible, and knew how to love a man in the truest sense. She wanted him to see her as a better option, not just to me but to everyone else. Luckily, Garrett wasn't a man to be manipulated. He knew me well enough to know that her every word was a lie. He didn't say anything to me right away, probably because he didn't want me to worry about it while I was busy preparing for the wedding. But I knew he'd said no, because she was so angry that she couldn't hide it. A few days before the wedding, Bianca became strangely cold toward me. No more backbiting, no more pretending, just an eerie silence. I knew she wasn't giving up, she was just preparing for something worse. But I couldn't believe she'd be so cruel as to do it on my wedding day. I thought I could predict her every move, but I underestimated her insane jealousy. I thought that if I just stood my ground, if I just believed in my love, everything would be fine. But I didn't know that Bianca didn't just want to destroy, she wanted to destroy everything. I didn't know that as I stood at the altar, in my white wedding dress, in the most sacred moment of my life, she would rush up to the stage and destroy everything I had built. I didn't know that she would tell the most horrible lies in front of everyone, and I didn't know that, in just a few short seconds, every eye in the room would be on me, not with blessing, but with horror. I didn't know that the real nightmare had yet to begin. I thought I was prepared for everything. I had anticipated every possible scenario. I knew Bianca would never let me live out my wedding day, and I told myself that as long as I held on, as long as I held Garrett's hand, I could get through anything. But at that moment, as I stood before the altar, as I looked into the eyes of my man with a pounding heart, as the vows of love were about to be said, a voice rang out in the middle of the room, tearing everything I had expected apart. Bianca's voice. I didn't know when she had stepped onto the stage. Everything was so fast, so sudden. A minute ago I was still a bride waiting for the most important moment of my life. A minute later she was standing there, in the middle of the stage, her eyes fierce, grabbing the microphone from the officiant, and without hesitation, and dropping a bombshell in the middle of the ceremony. I'm pregnant with Garrett's child. I didn't think words could be that devastating, but when she said it, it felt like the world had exploded right before my eyes. A dead silence fell over the hall for a split second, and then a huge wave of whispers erupted from every corner. The guests were in shock, their eyes darting from me, to Garrett, to Bianca, as if they were all trying to confirm if this was real. I couldn't say anything, couldn't move. I stood there, frozen, my breath caught in my chest. I didn't know how I reacted. I don't know if my legs were shaking, or if my face changed color. All I know is that my heart was no longer beating at a normal pace. It was erratic, painful, bewildering. My parents sat there, speechless. My father was stunned, and my mother, I saw her clasp her hands together, her eyes hovering between confusion and something else, hope. I had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who believed Bianca was the one who deserved more love. Garrett beside me had not spoken. I felt his hand squeeze mine, as if to remind me that he was still there, but at that moment I couldn't believe anything anymore. Everything was too chaotic. The whispers, the chatter, the unspoken questions that hung in the air, was it true? Could it be? Bianca stood there on stage, her eyes defiant. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. She declared, she insisted, she commanded everyone's attention. I know in that moment she thought she had won. She thought this wedding was completely ruined. She thought no one could continue the ceremony after such a horrifying accusation. I had seen her smugness before, but never so clearly. There was a cruel glee in her eyes, as if she were enjoying every second of my standing there in humiliation. She didn't need me to believe her. She didn't need Garrett to believe her. She just needed everyone to doubt her, just to push me into the midst of the scrutiny, the whispers, the apprehensive glances of the guests. I don't know who spoke first. It was probably some distant relative, a middle-aged woman I didn't know well, but I heard her say, "My God, is this true?" It was just that simple statement, but it sent shockwaves. The questions started to ring out, the whispers grew louder, and I could feel the nightmare closing in on me, squeezing me, choking everything I had tried to hold on to. I wanted to scream that it was a lie. I wanted to scream that I didn't believe it. I wanted to run up and grab the microphone from her, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I was frozen in my own nightmare. Then I looked at Garrett. I expected to see panic in his eyes, or at least disbelief. I was afraid that in that moment he would waver, that he would back down. But when I looked at him, I saw something else. I saw anger. He didn't turn to look at me. He just stared at Bianca, and I realized he hadn't wavered. Not at all. I don't know what calmed me. Maybe it was the squeeze of his hand, maybe it was the certainty in his gaze, but I knew I couldn't stand still. If I let the silence continue, if I let these lies continue to seep into every corner of the room, I would never get back to the truth. I couldn't let Bianca have what she wanted. I took a deep breath. I prepared to speak. But before I could open my mouth, Garrett stepped forward. And when he spoke, his voice didn't waver. Garrett stepped forward, standing like a shield between me and Bianca. There was no sign of panic, no doubt in his eyes. In that moment, I realized that this was the difference between me and Bianca. She thought she could destroy me with lies, but she never counted on Garrett never being moved. He faced Bianca, his eyes blunt, his voice calm but sharp. The room suddenly quieted. I could feel the heavy breathing of everyone around him. They were waiting, they were hanging on Garrett's every word. And then his voice rang out, clear word for word, then, bring the evidence. Bianca didn't react immediately. I could see the flash of surprise in her eyes, a brief moment, but enough for me to know that she hadn't expected this. She thought that if she just threw out an accusation, let the shock and commotion of the crowd disrupt everything, let me be drowned in whispers and suspicious looks, and the wedding would collapse. But Garrett didn't fall for it. Without a moment's hesitation, he repeated, "If you're carrying my child, prove it. An ultrasound? Blood tests? Anything?" The room was tense. I could see my parents sitting in front of me, my mother stirring slightly, as if she wanted to defend Bianca, but she said nothing. My father, he was silent, an expression I'd never seen before. Bianca still said nothing. I could see her trying to think of something, trying to turn the situation around, but this time she had no way out. Garrett didn't give her time to hide in her lies. The next few seconds passed in a heavy weight. And then she began to falter. I haven't had a checkup," she said, her voice losing its usual confidence. I saw her hand tighten on the microphone, but this time there was no triumph. "But I know for sure. I feel different. She started to stutter, her words no longer flowing as smoothly as before. I could see the eyes around the room changing, first confusion, then doubt, then a slow but irreversible understanding. A voice rang out from the audience, a voice I recognized immediately. "I can check right now." I turned. It was Madison, a close friend of mine, also a doctor. She stood up, her demeanor calm and professional, her gaze fixed on Bianca. "If you're really pregnant, I can check right here. It's just a simple test. If you're right, we'll all know right away." I don't know if anyone else heard Bianca swallow, but I heard her clearly. She took a step back. No longer arrogant, no longer pretending to be calm. For the first time, I saw her genuinely panic. The guests looked at each other. They were no longer engrossed in her story, but instead they were waiting for the one answer that would confirm everything. Bianca opened her mouth to say something, but then she hesitated. I don't know what she was thinking at that moment. Perhaps she knew that anything she said now would be meaningless. Maybe she knew that this was the end of the road. And then, in that moment, she turned and ran. The click of her high heels echoed in the absolute silence. No one chased after her. No one tried to stop her. All eyes just followed her back, head down, confused, defeated, as if she herself couldn't believe that her plan had gone up in smoke in just a few short minutes. I don't know if I was relieved or not. I only know that, at that moment, all I felt was a huge wave of relief. The whispers gradually rose again, but this time they were no longer bewildered or suspicious. They were mocking. I knew it. "Shame on you. She thinks she can fool everyone?" I turned to look at my parents. They sat there, motionless. My mother stared down at her hands, and my father watched Bianca leave, his face expressionless. There was no more cover-up, no more excuses they had always made for her. They had seen the whole truth. And for the first time in my life, they couldn't pretend they didn't know. I didn't know if I should feel relieved. Part of me wanted them to see this, wanted them to understand that I was never the selfish person they thought I was. But when the moment came, I didn't feel like winning or losing anymore. I just felt tired. Garrett turned to look at me. He didn't have to say anything. I knew that the wedding would go on. Because despite what had just happened, we had survived the worst. Bianca left the ceremony, leaving behind a strange atmosphere of shock and relief. I didn't know how to feel angry, hurt, heartbroken, but one thing was certain: I had won. Not by getting even, not by doing anything to bring her down, but by standing up to what she had done. I turned to Garrett. He didn't need to say anything, because I saw it all in his eyes: trust, certainty, and most of all, the calmness of someone who had never wavered. No one left the ceremony. Those who had come here weren't there to witness a family scandal, but to bless Garrett and me. And I knew that if I let this moment pass, if I let the shame overwhelm me, I would be the one who had truly lost. So I took a deep breath, squeezed Garrett's hand, and the wedding continued as if nothing had happened. I didn't look down at the pews where my parents sat. I didn't care if they were embarrassed or disappointed. They had seen Bianca lie, had seen her run away in a panic, and I didn't need any more confirmation from them. When Garrett and I said our vows, I knew I had truly moved on to a new chapter of my life. After the wedding, Garrett and I began a peaceful life together. We moved into a small house with a large backyard, where I could sip coffee every morning while watching the flowers bloom. Life wasn't always easy, but it was the life I chose, a life without jealousy, without manipulation, without Bianca. Mischief. My days were filled with laughter, the shrill cries of Mommy, echoing through the house, evenings spent around the dinner table, and Garrett's warm hugs at the end of a long day. I don't think about Bianca much anymore, because I'm too busy with my own happiness. But the strange thing is that even though I don't look for news about her, Bianca's story always finds me. I heard that she's still single. Not because she doesn't want to, but because no one wants to marry someone like her. At first, Bianca still tried to find a man to marry. She attended matchmaking sessions, trying to create an image of a perfect woman. But no matter how hard she tried to hide it, her true character was revealed. Men were attracted to her looks, but they soon realized that she didn't know how to love anyone but herself. And one by one they left. No one wanted to be with someone who was always jealous, always thought that the world owed them something, always tried to manipulate others to get what they wanted. And in the end, Bianca was isolated. My parents were no better. They believed they could protect Bianca forever, that as long as they were there for her, everything would be okay. But they were wrong. They couldn't carry Bianca's life forever. They couldn't pay for her mistake forever. And as they got older, as their health began to decline, they realized that Bianca wasn't someone they could rely on in their old age. They turned to me. The calls started to come more often, messages asking about the kids, requests to meet. They never did when I was little. They never cared for me like that, when I really needed them. I didn't reject them, but I was no longer the little girl who sought their approval. I didn't hate them. But I didn't need them anymore, because I had found my own family. One afternoon, as I sat in the little garden behind the house, my daughter came running up to me, her long black hair flying in the wind. She sat down next to me, her eyes shining like little stars. "Mother," she asked, "do you regret anything?" I looked into her eyes. I used to be that girl, the girl who was always hungry for recognition, always searching for something she could never have. But now I am not that girl anymore. I have gone through all the worst. I was hurt, betrayed, made second in my own family. But I stepped out of that darkness, built a life that no longer depended on anyone. I looked at my daughter and smiled. No, I said. I don't regret anything. Because I won, not by taking revenge but by living a happy life. My story is not just about a ruined wedding, or a selfish sister who manipulated others. It is not just about a biased family, or a painful journey to find acceptance. My story is about growing up, about learning to put yourself first, and most importantly, about finding happiness on your own terms. I know that there are many people out there who have gone through the same thing. Maybe you have been betrayed, treated unfairly, or looked down upon in your own family. Maybe you have had to give in, hold back, try to be loved but never receive it in return. But remember, your worth is not determined by how others treat you. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's to never let anyone else define your worth. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, I lived with the feeling that I wasn't good enough, that I was always behind, that I had to try harder to be worthy of love. But the truth is, no one has the right to decide whether you're worthy or not, except you. If you feel like you're not being treated fairly, if you feel like you're being held back because someone doesn't want you to move forward, remember that you don't need their approval to be successful. You don't need someone else's approval to know that you're worthy of happiness. You can create the life you want for yourself. Bianca always thought that I was holding her back, that I was taking something away from her. But the truth is, I never took anything away from her. She destroyed her own opportunities with jealousy and selfishness. Jealousy can turn a good person into a cruel one. It can turn someone from love to hate because they can't stand seeing someone else happy. But you can't live your life to please people like that. If someone is jealous of you, if someone tries to drag you down because they can't stand the way you're going, just keep going. People who can't be happy for your success don't deserve to be in your journey. Don't let them get in your way. One of the most painful lessons I've learned is that family isn't always where you belong. We're taught that family is everything, that parents are always right, that we have to sacrifice for our family. But the truth is, not all families treat their children fairly. My parents chose to side with Bianca, to treat me as less important. And for a long time I wondered if I had done something wrong. But eventually I realized that it wasn't my fault, it was theirs. If your family doesn't value you, if they always put others before you without regard for your feelings, you have the right to leave. You don't have to endure injustice just because it's family. You can find family elsewhere, with people who truly love and value you. Many people ask me why I didn't get revenge on Bianca, why I didn't do something to make her suffer like she did to me. But I didn't have to. The truth is, Bianca ruined her own life. I used to think that I would feel good about seeing her fail, about seeing my parents regretting spoiling her so much. But when that happened, I didn't feel good, I just felt relieved. I didn't need to get revenge on anyone. Because I won, not by hurting others, but by living a happy life. And that's what I want you to remember. Don't waste your time getting revenge on those who hurt you. Use that time to build a life you love, a life that will make them regret losing you. After all, I found my love. Garrett is not perfect, but he is the one who has always been there for me, who has always believed in me, and most importantly, who has always seen me as unique. I know that many of you may have been in bad relationships, have loved the wrong person, have felt unworthy of love. But never believe that you are not good enough to be loved. You deserve someone who loves you for who you are. You deserve a love that doesn't have to be fought for, proven or begged for. And if you haven't found that person yet, don't worry. They will come. Just keep believing in yourself. If my story has inspired you, if these lessons have made you feel stronger, please hit the subscribe button to continue accompanying me. I want this channel to be a place where we can all share, learn, and help each other overcome difficulties in life. Let's create a community where no one is left behind. And if you're going through what I'm going through, remember that you're not alone. Hit like, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss any future stories. Because you deserve to be heard. Thanks for being here, and see you in the next videos.